So apparently my neighborhood association decided my backyard was the perfect spot for their president's daughter's wedding. And they skipped one teeny detail, actually asking me. I was coming home after a 2-week work trip, exhausted and ready to collapse in my own space, when I turned the corner and saw industrial-grade tent stakes hammered straight through my late grandfather's prize-winning rose beds. The diesel fumes from 3 generator trucks were thick enough to taste, and a catering crew looked at me like I was the trespasser on my own land. The scraping sound of metal tent poles grinding against my house siding was like nails on a chalkboard, and I could smell the sweet, crushed scent of my jasmine bushes, mixing with muddy tire tracks all over my freshly seeded lawn. Then Marla Whitfield, our ever-pleasant HOA president, strutted over with this smug little wave and a stack of papers about a community use clause. What would you do if you walked into that nightmare? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I need to know I'm not alone in this madness. Let me back up and explain how I got stuck in this disaster. I'm Daniel Cho, and I inherited my grandfather's 1940 craftsman home in Maplebrook Hills about 6 months ago. This wasn't just any house. It was where I spent every summer growing up, learning to care for his legendary rose garden and listening to his stories about standing up to neighborhood bullies. I work as a freelance software contractor, mostly from home. Honestly, I thought moving to the suburbs would mean peace. Quiet street, big trees, the kind of place where your biggest issue is remembering trash day. Boy, was I wrong. Enter Marla Whitfield, our 52-year-old HOA president who's been running unchallenged for 8 straight years. Picture the most cliché Karen you can dream up. Now crank her sense of entitlement up by a factor of 10. She's married to a city councilman, drives a white BMW with vanity plates that read HOA boss, and has this way of staring at you like you're something nasty she scraped off her shoe. Marla has a gift for selective rule enforcement that could put a crooked politician to shame. Take Mr. Desai, the kind elderly gentleman 3 houses down. Marla bombarded him with violation letters over his non-compliant garden decorations. Those decorations were traditional Indian brass peacocks that had been there for 15 years. Then there was the young black family, the Browns, who got hounded non-stop about their kid's basketball hoop until they finally took it down just to get some peace and quiet. My first taste of Marla's special brand of justice came 2 weeks after I moved in. A violation notice showed up on my front door. Apparently my mailbox was the wrong shade of white. I'm not exaggerating. She literally had a color swatch chart. When I politely asked whether Dove white versus Pearl white really made any difference, the $50 fine magically turned into $200. That was only the opening act. My grass was too long at 3.1 inches when the rule capped it at exactly 3 inches. My Halloween decorations supposedly stayed up past November 1st, even though I'd taken them down on Halloween night. She filed a complaint about my work van parked in my own driveway, claiming it made the neighborhood look commercial. The pattern couldn't have been clearer. Every time I pushed back on one of her ridiculous notices, she'd dig up something new to nitpick. It felt like living under a microscope, controlled by someone who genuinely wished I'd never moved in. But here's where things start to get interesting. Buried on page 47 of our HOA covenant, and trust me, nobody casually reads all the way to page 47, there's this little gem called a community use clause. It was originally written for actual emergencies, like if someone needed to use a neighbor's yard during a natural disaster, or for block parties where everyone gave permission. Marla, being the creative rule twister she is, decided this clause meant she could label any community benefit event as fair game for using private yards. And apparently her daughter Brianna's joy was such a monumental gift to the neighborhood that my backyard magically became the ideal wedding venue. The truly infuriating part? I later found out that Marla had already charged Brianna's future in-laws $8,000 as a venue fee. That money went straight into something she called the HOA Special Events Fund, which was really just Marla's secret personal slush account that nobody else even knew existed. So there I was, standing in my own driveway, breathing in diesel exhaust and watching total strangers wreck 3 generations of careful gardening, while Marla waved her stack of documents around like she owned the land. The metallic taste of pure fury was rising in my mouth. But I knew losing my temper wouldn't fix anything. I had to get smart, fast. The next morning, I woke up to find a formal notice taped to my front door. Not slipped politely into the mailbox like a normal person might do. No, taped right at eye level so every neighbor walking by could see it. Community events scheduled, it announced in Marla's perfectly branded HOA letterhead. 200 guests, full wedding reception this coming Saturday, professional vendors already booked, deposits paid, and here's the kicker. Marla's written justification was that Brianna's happiness benefits the entire community. I wish I were joking. I called for an emergency HOA meeting faster than you can say property rights violation. The community center that night was packed, but not in the way I'd hoped. Marla had rallied her usual fan club, the group I'd started calling the Tuesday morning coffee circle, and they were lined up like a human shield around her. I walked in with my property deed printed, highlighted, and ready, determined to confront this insane interpretation of the community use clause. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and Marla's heavy vanilla perfume was so overpowering I could practically taste it from 3 rows back. My pen kept doing this nervous tap, tap, tap against my clipboard because honestly, I was scared. But I stood up anyway. Marla, I brought my property deed tonight because I think there's been a misunderstanding about what counts as community use. She didn't even bother to lift her eyes from her perfectly arranged binder. The covenant is clear, dear. Perhaps you should have read it more carefully before moving here. Dear, like I was some clueless kid who couldn't grasp the big grown-up rules. That's when I stumbled onto the first mini twist in this whole disaster. After the meeting, I was heading to my car when Mrs. Alvarez from down the street grabbed my arm. "Daniel, honey, you need to hear something," she whispered, looking around like we were plotting a spy mission. "Marla charged Brianna's in-laws $8,000 for your backyard." $8,000. I drove home in a daze, my brain spinning trying to absorb that information. Marla wasn't just using my property without my consent. She was cashing in on it in a big way. And here's the real kicker. None of the other residents had any idea about this fee or about the mysterious HOA Special Events Fund where that cash had vanished. That night I became best friends with Google. I crammed more about property rights and HOA limitations into my head than I ever thought I'd need. The musty scent of my grandfather's old law books mixed with the smell of fresh coffee as I researched straight through until 3 in the morning. Here's what I learned. HOAs are not allowed to use emergency-style clauses for personal profit. Period. If they're making money off your land, they've crossed the line from community oversight into flat-out commercial exploitation. That's your first legal takeaway. Write that down. I found cases almost identical to mine. Legal precedents showing that unreasonable community use is absolutely something you can fight in court. So I did what any sane person in my position would do. I called a property law attorney for a free consultation. But Marla wasn't even close to finished with me, not by a long shot. The next morning, another violation notice appeared, this time for excessive outdoor lighting. She cited me for my porch light, the same porch light that had been there for 3 decades, the same one that helped elderly Mr. Desai find his way home from evening walks, the same style every house on the street had. Then came a threatening letter accusing me of disrupting community harmony, as if I were the one causing problems by objecting to having my property hijacked. But the real sucker punch was what came next. I started hearing whispers at the grocery store, catching neighbors crossing aisles to avoid me. Marla had launched a quiet but nasty rumor campaign. Suddenly I was difficult. I didn't respect community values. I was that troublesome newcomer who couldn't just go along with the program. The echo of my own footsteps down the cereal aisle had never felt so isolating. I realized Marla wasn't just trying to force her way into my yard. She was trying to push me out of the neighborhood completely, make me so uncomfortable, so worn down that I'd either fold or move. Standing there between the granola bars and oatmeal, holding my shopping list and trying to swallow my irritation, I made a decision. I wasn't going anywhere. This was my grandfather's house, my refuge, my home. If Marla wanted a war, then fine. She was going to get one. But I was going to approach it in ways she'd never see coming, until Marla escalated fast. 2 days later, a city inspector showed up at my door. Turns out he was one of Marla's golfing buddies, because of course he was. They'd come up with a list of supposed unpermitted modifications on my property, including my grandfather's 30-year-old workshop shed that predated Marla's own arrival to the neighborhood. The inspector combed through my property like he was searching for buried treasure. He flagged foundation concerns on my front steps, electrical hazards on outdoor outlets that had passed inspection multiple times, and structural issues with a pergola that had survived decades of storms without ever creaking. It all added up to $2,500 in potential fines and a 30-day compliance order. That evening, Marla appeared at my door in full smug mode. "Still think challenging the HOA is worth it, dear?" she asked with that smile of hers that always felt like a threat wrapped in politeness. I wanted to slam the door. Instead, I smiled right back and said, "Absolutely." The next morning, I hired Jacob Myers, a local attorney known for handling HOA disputes. His office smelled faintly of burnt coffee and determination. And when I explained what was happening, he grinned like he'd just been handed a legal puzzle he couldn't wait to dismantle. "Daniel," he said, scribbling sharp notes across his pad, "Marla just stepped into very expensive territory. Community use clauses get tricky fast, but the moment a profit motive enters the picture, they become legally invalid. When an HOA acts like a commercial entity, they lose their protective status. That's your second legal takeaway, and it's a big one." Jacob filed a formal challenge and demanded financial transparency regarding Marla's secret events fund. Meanwhile, I wasn't just sitting around waiting. I'd ordered a detailed title insurance report, something most homeowners never even think about, and what I found nearly made my eyes pop out of my head. My property was never legally brought under the HOA's authority. Let me repeat that. I was never actually part of the HOA. The original 1987 subdivision plan excluded my lot due to a separate water easement. My grandfather had never signed the HOA covenant because he didn't have to. Every violation letter, every threat, every disciplinary action, absolutely meaningless. I wasn't legally under Marla's jurisdiction at all. When I showed Jacob the documents, he burst out laughing. "Oh, Marla is going to have a terrible day." But Marla refused to go down quietly. The moment she sensed things slipping out of her control, she went into full desperation mode. She tried blocking my access to my mailbox, which is a federal crime, by the way. She organized a neighborhood safety watch to monitor visitors at my home, like I was running an underground operation instead of doing software work. Then she contacted my biggest client and implied I was mentally unstable and might jeopardize their project. That one nearly worked. I had to spend a very tense hour reassuring them that no, I wasn't having some meltdown, and yes, their project was still on track. But there was one silver lining to Marla's desperation. It made people start coming forward. Mr. Desai approached me quietly one evening while I checked my mail. He held his own stack of paperwork detailing years of harassment, including $3,000 in bogus landscaping fines that seemed suspiciously discriminatory. The Browns told me Marla had anonymously contacted child services about their parenting because their kids played basketball in their driveway. Mrs. Alvarez brought over a folder 2 inches thick with unreasonable fines, threatening letters, and rule violations that didn't actually violate anything. Marla had been terrorizing half the neighborhood, and everyone had suffered alone. That's when I had an idea. What if we met, shared experiences, compared evidence? Maybe we had more power together than we realized. That evening, 5 of Marla's former targets gathered around my kitchen table. We jokingly called ourselves the Marla Survivors Support Group, and for the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone. We had evidence, we had witnesses, and thanks to my title report, we had the legal upper hand. Marla had picked the wrong homeowner to bully. Then Marla went nuclear. On Tuesday morning, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door and handed me a temporary restraining order. Marla claimed I had threatened her with violence and posed imminent danger to the community. All lies, but there it was. Formal documents, court date on Friday, conveniently scheduled the day before the wedding. Her strategy was simple and darkly brilliant. If the restraining order held, I'd be legally barred from my own property during the wedding, and she'd get her dream venue without interference. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth as I read the papers. But you know what? I wasn't panicking anymore. I was getting methodical. Jacob immediately filed an emergency motion to dismiss the restraining order and demanded Marla provide actual proof of these supposed threats. This was where my mild paranoia about security cameras finally paid off. I handed over footage from 3 different angles, showing every interaction I'd had with Marla over the past month. Not once did I raise my voice, make a threatening gesture, or act remotely aggressive. In fact, the videos showed the opposite. Marla yelling, pointing at me, invading my space, and in one particularly damning clip, even shoving me when I tried to photograph the damage done to my grandfather's rose garden. With that, we counterfiled harassment charges and attached an evidence folder that had grown to nearly 3 inches thick. Filing a false restraining order is perjury, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. That's your third legal takeaway, and Jacob made sure Marla's attorney understood that loud and clear. But the real explosion came from Jacob's discovery requests. Once you file formal legal action against an HOA, they have to open their financial records. And wow, did those records tell a story. Marla hadn't just dipped into the special events fund, she'd been siphoning money from the HOA for years. A trip to Maui listed as community research. Her daughter Brianna's college classes labeled educational outreach. A full kitchen remodel filed under HOA workspace upgrades. Total amount stolen, $45,000 over 3 years. When the community learned about the embezzlement, the reaction was swift and unforgiving. Marla's little coffee circle loyalists vanished like smoke. An emergency HOA meeting was called, not by Marla, but by residents who had finally awakened to what was happening behind their backs. Brianna was devastated. I honestly felt for her. Imagine discovering your wedding drama was only the surface of your mother's criminal activity. She tried to cancel the ceremony, but it was too late. Deposits were non-refundable, vendors were already committed, and guests had made travel plans. And Marla? She panicked. But panicked Marla was even more dangerous than smug Marla. First, she tried bribing the city inspector to condemn my house. He recorded their conversation and delivered it straight to the police. Then she ramped up her rumor campaign, spreading nonsense about my mental health and work stability. But instead of hurting me, it made her look completely unhinged. Then she crossed the final line. She vandalized my property. My upgraded security system caught everything. Crystal clear footage of Marla creeping around my yard at 2 a.m, spray paint can in hand, scrawling community menace across my garage door. The cold night air carried the sharp sting of fresh paint, while Marla lurked like some deranged suburban ninja. The satisfying click of my camera's motion detection was probably the best sound I'd heard all month. When confronted with the security footage of her late-night graffiti session, Marla claimed she was protecting the neighborhood's values. The police were not amused. She even threatened to sue me for defamation over the embezzlement evidence, apparently pointing out documented crimes now counted as slander in her world. Her own lawyer had to explain that truth is an absolute defense in defamation cases, and insisting otherwise was only digging her hole deeper. Through all of this, I stuck to a strategy my grandfather would have appreciated. Calm documentation. Every threat, every illegal stunt, every violation got photographed, logged, time-stamped, and stored. I wasn't gearing up for a petty feud. I was building an airtight case. But I was also preparing something else for the wedding day itself. Jacob helped me draft a settlement offer that would give Marla one final chance to salvage her life before it crumbled completely. She could use my property for the wedding, but only if she agreed to a list of strict conditions meant to restore justice to everyone she'd harmed. The terms were straightforward. She had to issue a full public apology to every person she'd harassed, repay every unreasonable fine, restore all stolen HOA funds, resign immediately, and accept a 5-year ban from any leadership role in the community. In return, the wedding could proceed, and she could avoid the federal consequences we now knew were headed her way. It was more mercy than she deserved, but my grandfather used to say that justice without compassion becomes its own kind of cruelty. Marla had until Saturday morning to sign. Meanwhile, our preparation continued. I assembled a small team. Mr. Desai, retired engineer and walking embodiment of precision, became my logistics lead, checking measurements and creating contingency plans like he was running a construction project. The Browns took charge of documentation and online strategy, using their media skills to ensure everything would be properly recorded, time-stamped, and witnessed. Mrs. Alvarez stepped up as community liaison, organizing conversations with neighbors who'd been too afraid to speak out before. Jacob anchored our legal plan, drafting filings that were so clean they practically sparkled. Tom, the settlement itself was crafted beautifully. It wasn't just a deal, it was a court-enforceable order once filed, which meant any breach came with instant legal consequences. That's your fifth legal takeaway. A settlement isn't worth anything unless it has teeth. And trust me, ours did. But I also had a backup plan. I rented a bulldozer. Not to be destructive, but to legally clear my property if Marla tried one last stunt. My cousin Alex, who owned a construction company, gave his crew exact hand signals and timing instructions. The bulldozer sat at a nearby job site, close enough that the rumble of test starts drifted across the neighborhood. Marla heard it. Every time she came by to micromanage wedding preparations, she kept glancing nervously toward the sound. The neighborhood responded too. Residents planned a community potluck for the day after the wedding, a healing event meant to rebuild the unity Marla had spent years tearing apart. People donated to help victims of her fines and legal harassment. Others worked on rewriting HOA voting rules so no one person could ever monopolize power again. Even local news began reframing the whole situation as a story of community resilience rather than HOA drama. On a personal level, I prepared as well. Therapy had taught me boundaries and calm confrontation. Grandfather's sayings echoed in my head. Protect peace, but never empower bullies. The whir of newly installed security cameras and the scent of freshly printed legal documents filled my home as we tied up final details. We weren't acting out of anger anymore. We were building structural change. Wednesday night, I brought our little Marla survivors group together one more time. The comforting warmth of supportive neighbors around my kitchen table felt like the foundation of something new and better for our community. Everything was lined up, legal filings complete, backup plans rehearsed, community support solid, and media attention centered on the positive transformation rather than the chaos. Marla had until Saturday morning to sign the settlement. If she agreed, Brianna would still have her dream wedding, and our neighborhood could finally start healing. If she refused, well, that bulldozer's engine had a very recognizable growl. As Saturday approached, Marla's desperation hit new, unhinged heights. Thursday morning, I woke up to find every one of my utilities shut off: water, power, and internet. Somehow, Marla had convinced the utility companies that I no longer lived there, and that service needed to be terminated. Completely illegal, of course. One call to Jacob and everything was restored within 2 hours. But it sent a message. Marla was willing to commit multiple felonies out of spite. Then she went after my business directly. 3 clients contacted me, unsettled after receiving anonymous tips about my supposed mental instability and claims that I was too emotionally unstable to finish their projects. One voicemail in particular claimed I was having a psychotic break and recommended immediate termination of all contracts. It was vicious, but clearly amateur, with the same odd phrasing Marla always used in her violation letters. The next morning, I walked outside and smelled the harsh scent of shredded rubber. All 4 tires on my work van had been slashed. The garden hoses were cut. My mailbox was smashed in as if someone had taken a bat to it. But Marla had once again forgotten about my state-of-the-art security system. The cameras captured her clearly, even through the hoodie she'd thrown on, thanks to the glow of streetlights reflecting right off her face at the perfect angle. Jacob filed additional harassment charges before I even finished my first sip of coffee. Later that afternoon, she attempted a different approach. She came to my door with an envelope stuffed full of cash, $25,000 in crisp bills. Her hands were shaking as she held it out. "Just disappear for the weekend," she said, voice trembling. "Take a little vacation. Pretend none of this is happening." When I refused, she snapped completely. She shouted about how I was destroying property values, ruining her daughter's future, and sabotaging the whole neighborhood. Several neighbors stepped outside to watch, which only made Marla scream louder about conspiracies and betrayal. But then came the wildest twist yet. Marla's husband, Councilman Roger Whitfield, reached out to Jacob privately. He wanted a meeting, alone. Desperate to salvage his own career, Roger offered to testify against Marla's financial crimes and reveal additional corruption as long as we helped him negotiate immunity in the federal case now circling him. What he revealed blew even Jacob's mind. We already knew Marla had been stealing from the HOA, but her operation was bigger than that. There were falsified insurance claims, tax evasion schemes, and kickbacks linked to multiple city contracts. Marla hadn't just been an overzealous HOA president. She had been running a small-scale corruption ring for years. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who nitpicked mailbox paint colors and fined people for uneven lawn edges had been committing serial felonies in the background. And so, Friday evening, things hit a new low. Marla called emergency services claiming I was armed, dangerous, and threatening to blow up the wedding. She tried to have me forcibly committed for psychiatric evaluation. 2 officers and a crisis counselor showed up, and within seconds it was obvious who the real problem was. I was calmly working on code in my home office. Marla, on the other hand, was pacing on the sidewalk with wild eyes and erratic behavior. The officers sternly warned her that abusing emergency services is a criminal offense. Meanwhile, the most meaningful shift was happening quietly. Brianna had learned the full truth of her mother's crimes. She was heartbroken, horrified, and furious. She threatened to elope rather than let the wedding continue under this mountain of scandal. Losing her daughter's respect was Marla's personal nightmare. That night, Brianna came to my door, exhausted and red-eyed. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know what she was doing. To you, to anyone. If there's anything I can do to make this right." I invited her inside, and over 2 hours and a couple mugs of coffee, we talked about boundaries, manipulation, and recognizing the difference between loyalty and enabling. She wasn't like her mother at all. She was thoughtful, kind, and trapped in a mess she didn't create. By that point, federal agents had quietly served search warrants at the Whitfield's home. They seized computers, boxes of documents, and years of financial histories. The investigation had gone from simmering to boiling. Local news coverage intensified. Reporters camped near the neighborhood, waiting to capture Marla's next meltdown. Headlines spread, HOA president under federal investigation, community uprising after alleged corruption, wedding weekend turns criminal. As I double-checked my backup door locks that night, the metallic click of each latch felt grounding. Everything was in motion. Every contingency plan was ready. The community was united. The legal foundation was airtight. I knew we were ready for whatever Marla might try. Saturday morning arrived with Marla attempting one last maneuver, so outrageous it felt like satire. At 6 a.m., I opened my door, coffee in hand, wearing pajamas, to find 2 confused mental health evaluators on my porch. Marla had contacted a private psychiatric service claiming I was armed, suicidal, and a danger to myself and others. The lead psychiatrist took one look at my calm posture, my tidy living room behind me, and then at Marla lurking behind my fence like some unhinged suburban stalker. Within minutes after reviewing the legal documents and hearing my explanation, he apologized and warned me that filing false psychiatric emergencies was a felony. When he walked over to confront Marla about abusing emergency services, her expression collapsed into something between shock and rage. It was almost surreal. Meanwhile, I was finishing the last touches on my final backup plan. The security system test came back perfect. Every camera was recording, all backups were working, and the property sensors were synced. The diesel hum of Alex's Bulldozer, conducting its morning engine test 2 blocks away, drifted faintly through the neighborhood. The timing was perfect. Marla heard it, and the noise rattled her nerves like a warning bell. But her smear campaign went nuclear that morning. She had purchased a full-page ad in the local newspaper. Yes, an actual printed ad, titled "Dangerous Neighbor Threatens Community Safety," complete with a photo of me taken without my consent, and a completely fabricated story about violent threats. The editor contacted me personally to apologize. Marla had paid cash for the ad and pretended it was a public service notice. They retracted it within hours and printed a correction for Sunday morning's edition. But she wasn't done. On social media, she created multiple fake profiles to spread rumors about my mental health, my work reliability, and even made claims about a supposed criminal history. She posted my address and warned people to stay away. It was harassment territory bordering on federal cyberstalking. Then karma hit hard. Brianna's future in-laws, The Ashfords, a wealthy and well-respected business family, finally learned the full scope of Marla's behavior. Horrified, they contacted me directly. Mr. Ashford, owner of a chain of luxury hotels, personally apologized and offered to cover all damages, legal expenses, and anything else related to Marla's actions. Their family name was taking a hit from being associated with her scandal, and they wanted to help fix it. Even more impactful, they had hired a private investigator, and the investigator found even deeper layers of Marla's corruption. Bank statements showing long-term misappropriation, forged financial documents, and a pattern of fraudulent transactions dating back more than a decade. The federal case went from solid to bulletproof. By noon, Marla's last remaining loyalists, the remnants of her morning coffee clique, abandoned her. Mrs. Hensley, once her closest ally, came to my door trembling, apologizing, and confessing that Marla had manipulated them for years. "She told us you were mentally dangerous," she whispered, "said you threatened people. We believed her." The truth was finally unraveling that Marla had built an entire shadow narrative to justify her cruelty. By the time I signed the final round of legal documents Saturday afternoon, I could feel the tension building behind my eyes like a pressure valve ready to burst. But the moment Jacob clicked his pen shut, completing the last verification, a wave of calm washed over me. Everything was prepared. Every safeguard was set. Every weakness on Marla's side was exposed. The scent of clean paper mixed with the distant rumble of heavy machinery, creating an atmosphere that felt like poised justice. Marla had 1 hour to sign the settlement agreement. After that, the bulldozer would clear my property of all unauthorized structures. The moment of truth hit at precisely 1 p.m. Saturday afternoon. I pulled into my own driveway to find Marla acting like the self-appointed director of the century, waving her arms, barking at vendors, and pretending she was running a glamorous event production instead of trespassing on my land. Wedding guests were filtering in, glancing uneasily at the rising number of neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers gathering along the sidewalk. The instant Marla spotted me walking up with Jacob and the folder of legal documents, she actually tried to have me arrested for trespassing on my own property. The police officer on duty, already briefed by Jacob, looked exhausted as he explained property law to her, while more than 200 wedding guests watched the scene unfold. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "he owns this property. If anyone is at risk of being charged with trespassing, it's you." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. Jacob stepped forward with theatrical precision and served Marla the final settlement contract. He read the conditions aloud so everyone could hear. Public apology, full repayment, immediate resignation, 5-year leadership ban. "You have 30 minutes to sign," he said, tapping his watch. "After that, construction equipment will remove all unauthorized structures from this private property." Right on cue, the diesel rumble of Alex's bulldozer grew louder as it rolled down the street toward the corner. The color drained from Marla's face. She realized this was not a bluff. The bulldozer was not symbolic. It was ready. Brianna, already emotionally wrecked, broke down crying. "Mom, please," she begged through tears. "Just sign it. Please. I can't lose everything because of this. Please." Her voice cracked, and the guests looked away awkwardly, sympathy flooding toward the young bride. But Marla's pride was a fortress, and she refused. Even with federal charges looming and her daughter pleading in front of everyone, she screamed, "I've done nothing wrong. This is my community. I have protected us for 8 years. Some people just don't understand what standards mean." And that's when the black SUVs arrived. 2 federal vehicles pulled up to the curb, doors opening in perfect procession. Agent Sofia Martinez stepped out holding search warrants and an arrest warrant for Roger, who was already in custody. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Someone handed me the wedding DJ's microphone. Feedback crackled sharply, and suddenly I was standing there with 200 people waiting for me to speak. 3 years ago, Marla Whitfield began a deliberate campaign of harassment against me and multiple residents, I said, projecting my voice clearly across the stunned gathering. What started as petty violations escalated into financial crimes, discriminatory enforcement, municipal corruption, and now federal offenses. I lifted the thick folder of evidence. Anyone who wants to see proof is welcome to examine 3 years' worth of documentation. Every fine, every threat, every illegal action has been recorded. There wasn't a breath of sound, just the steady hum of the bulldozer idling nearby. But this isn't about revenge, I continued, locking eyes with Marla. It's about protection. Protection for Mr. Desai, who was fined for celebrating his culture. Protection for the Browns, whose kids were reported to child services for playing basketball. Protection for Mrs. Alvarez, and dozens of others who endured this alone. One by one, Marla's victims stepped forward to speak. Mr. Desai's voice trembled as he described thousands in bogus fines. The Browns recounted how someone anonymously targeted their family. Mrs. Alvarez held up her thick folder of threats. More residents joined, each story building a pattern too big to ignore. Cameras flashed. News crews streamed the entire thing live. Agent Martinez approached with handcuffs in hand just as Marla realized the scale of her unraveling. Federal charges, state charges, civil suits, reputation destroyed, leadership stripped. At that moment, Brianna did something no one expected. She took the pen from her mother's shaking hand and held it out silently. "Mom, sign it, please, for me, for our family, for whatever is left." The only sound was the scratching of pen across paper, Marla's shaky signature marking her resignation, apology, and restitution. For a beat, the world stood still. Then the crowd erupted in applause. Not mockery, but genuine relief that justice had finally come. As federal agents guided Marla toward the SUVs, handcuffs glinting in the afternoon sun, she looked back at the wedding setup, the same one she had tried to steal, manipulate, and weaponize. It was proceeding, but now under my supervision and on the community's terms. Brianna's ceremony went forward beautifully, despite the chaos swirling around her mother's downfall. And in keeping with what my grandfather would have done, I arranged for all the extra food from the reception to be donated to a local shelter. Even in the middle of everything, kindness could still ripple outward. Marla began her court-ordered community service the following week, assigned to the senior center, ironically the same place where several residents she once targeted regularly gathered. More than once, Mr. Desai stopped by to check on her progress, his polite smile doing nothing to hide the poetic justice of the situation. She completed her hours quietly, without fanfare, with a humility that only consequences can teach. 6 months passed, and our neighborhood didn't just recover. It transformed. Physically, emotionally, structurally, everything was different. Mr. Desai was elected the new HOA president, with Mrs. Alvarez serving as secretary. Their very first act? Removing every discriminatory covenant. Their second? Rewriting the community use clause so that actual, explicit homeowner consent was required. Radical idea, right? Asking permission before using someone's backyard. The memorial garden we built on the piece of land I donated became a tribute to my grandfather's memory and a symbol of our community's healing. The space blossomed with roses, wildflowers, and ornamental shrubs, carefully arranged by neighbors who had once kept silent out of fear. Now they were planting with pride. Every resident contributed something, plants, labor, or funds, and it quickly became the neighborhood's favorite gathering spot. Property values didn't just stabilize after the scandal, they actually rose. Word spread that Maplebrook Hills had reformed its HOA into something transparent, democratic, and genuinely community-focused. Turns out people are willing to pay more to live in a neighborhood that doesn't tolerate bullying disguised as standards. The story became a model for other communities dealing with similar abuse. What had once been an HOA horror story slowly evolved into a blueprint for positive change. With the restitution money and additional contributions, we created a community justice scholarship fund. Our very first recipient was the Browns' daughter, who had endured the stress of those false child services complaints. She chose to study civil rights law and dreams of protecting other families from housing discrimination. She sends me emails each semester with updates on her classes, her internships, her goals. Every message reminded me why standing up to Marla had mattered so much. Her passion for justice reminded me why this fight was worth it. My business flourished after everything went public, though not in the sensational, drama-fueled way people might expect. The attention brought new clients, sure, but it also opened my eyes to a new direction. I began specializing in software tools for nonprofits and advocacy groups, building systems that helped underdogs stand up to bureaucratic abuse. What started as a personal battle quietly reshaped my entire career. In a strange way, Marla had unintentionally pushed me into work that actually mattered. Jacob Myers, my attorney, became something of a regional celebrity in the world of HOA disputes. He was suddenly the go-to guy for anyone dealing with power-hungry community boards. We built a referral partnership, sending clients back and forth, me helping advocacy groups with their tech, him helping their members reclaim their rights. Together, we've helped dozens of people who were stuck in situations that looked a lot like mine had once looked. As for Marla, she completed her community service, paid her restitution, and cooperated with the federal investigation. Because she agreed to testify, many of her charges were reduced, but she still faced consequences: financial, social, emotional. Her husband's resignation triggered reforms in the city's contracting process, and a broader corruption network unraveled because she finally told the truth. Surprisingly, Brianna's marriage survived the chaos. Over time, she even began rebuilding her relationship with her mother. A few months after finishing her court-ordered therapy, Marla sent me a handwritten letter, an apology. It wasn't perfect, but it was sincere. And while we'll never be friends, I can say this: there's something resembling mutual respect now. The sweet fragrance of my grandfather's roses, now thriving again, greets me every morning, reminding me that justice, much like gardening, demands patience, steady care, and the belief that something beautiful can grow out of difficult ground. Our neighborhood now hosts monthly community coffee gatherings that actually include everyone, not just Marla's old inner circle. We collaborate on issues, vote transparently, and support each other in ways we never experienced before. Not a single discrimination complaint has surfaced since the new leadership took charge. The difference feels like night and day, like the air itself is lighter. Looking back, I realized this story was never only about a wedding or an HOA turf war. It was about what happens when everyday people decide they're done being pushed around. When they choose to fight back not with cruelty, but with intelligence, documentation, resilience, and just enough righteous anger to push change forward. My grandfather always said, "Stand firm with kindness, but never enable cruelty." It took secure cameras, court orders, and a bulldozer rumbling down the street before I truly understood what he meant. Now I live in a community where neighbors look out for each other instead of looking for reasons to complain, where differences are celebrated instead of punished, where leadership serves instead of threatens. And every time I catch a whiff of diesel fumes or hear the roar of construction equipment, it makes me smile and remember the day justice rolled in on steel tracks. And here's my challenge to you. Share your own HOA nightmare stories in the comments below. Believe me, you are not the only one dealing with these battles. These petty tyrants depend on our silence and isolation. But when we speak up and stand together, they don't stand a chance. And if this story reminded you that ordinary people can spark extraordinary change, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Next week, I'm telling you about the time I caught a porch pirate stealing packages, and how a glitter bomb ended with some very confused police officers. And remember, bullies count on your silence and isolation. Document everything, know your rights, and never let anyone make you feel small in your own home.